was the last thing you did, you two?
We took 4 cars last night.
Last night, where?
Yes, in Pinoni. Take it with a gun. What can we do? Only money that I want. Yeah, the people, I will show you with your last born. If you don't want to give me a man, I will show you with your last born. Took him to shower or to the hot shower.
If I've got a child there, you saying you would hurt the child to find out the information?
Took your child, I put it in oven. I make oven on. You will give me. No other way.
Is he serious? I can't tell if when he's joking.
These people, they're cruel. You know, they're cruel. But they don't care. They feel fuck all even to kill somebody.
Okay. That's all I got on me.
They missed one thing, a GoPro camera that recorded the incident. It has now gone viral on the internet, magnifying the deep-seated crime problem in the Rainbow Nation, which is home to some of the most dangerous cities in the world. Johannesburg, according to the 2013 study, is the 4th most violent city in South Africa, with more than 2 million gun holders licensed to own firearms and about 1 million unlicensed ones. Experts warn violent crime has reached worrying proportions. The Rainbow Nation is now lambasted as the and murder capital of the world. As night falls, the streets of Joburg light up, concealing the shame that has been consuming many of the cities in South Africa. The rising crime rates vis-à-vis the growing gap between the haves and the have-nots. Is solving social inequities the solution to fighting crime? The jury is out.
Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, and thank you very much for joining me here again today. Today, we are talking about probably the foulest person I have ever read about. And it is not only about what he did, but it's how he enjoyed what he did and how he still continued to be absolutely disgusting after he was caught. But before we head into today's case, last week we spoke about the very sad and tragic case of Talib Peterson, and if you haven't seen that, I will link it up here for you. And that case was about a South African icon whose life was cut short for greed and status. So with that being said, let's get into today's case.
Intended for mature audiences only.
Today we are heading over to Western Area, which is a town in the Gauteng province of South Africa. It is part of the West Rand district, and in September of 1968, a little boy was born, and his name is Jack Mogale. Jack was born into a normal family. He had a working mom and dad, and he was the oldest sibling, and he did have a younger sister. There was not much reported about Jack's childhood, but he did go to school until the age of 16, so around grade 10. And after Jack left school, he then went out into the working world and he tried to find some work. But everything in his childhood, as far as I could read, sounded pretty normal. There was nothing out of the ordinary. He had working class parents and they worked really hard to provide for Jack and his siblings. Then, once Jack left school and he had been working out in the big wide world for a couple of years, he then met his first wife. And even though Jack met his first wife, there are some conflicting reports about when they exactly got married. But Jack was married and he ended up having 2 children with his wife. And both of his children were girls. But sadly in 2006, Jack's wife passed away from an unknown illness. And when Jack left school and after he had started working and after he had gotten married, he never really moved far away from home. He always stayed in the West Rand area, and he continued to stay in a similar area even after his wife had passed away. And Jack's neighbors and friends always thought that Jack was the kindest and sweetest person they had met. He was also reported to be a very staunch believer in God and also said to be a very religious man. And he would attend all services, especially those on a Sunday. His neighbors also said that he was very gentle and that he would never hurt anyone as far as they knew. One neighbor recalled quite specifically that she would often go to Jack's house for herbal tea that he would make, and she also said that it was quite a healing tea that Jack would say that the substance was. Jack Mogale specifically called it holy tea that he would then give to people in his neighborhood or anyone who came to his house. And people would come to Jack in order to find boyfriends or for marriage advice or for an injury that they had, and they really believed that Jack could heal them and that this holy tea was really working. Or if they didn't drink the holy tea, then it would be his prayers and his beliefs and what he would say to them that would heal them or that would get them boyfriends. And most of the people that came to his house were women. There were little reports to men that came to his house. I think there were only a handful, but majority of the people that came to his house for healing, for advice, were women, and Jack would mostly give the tea to the women. And a lot of people believed that Jack Mogale was actually a healer, because one person who did go to Jack said that they had a very sore foot and that it was really sore, and Jack then gave them this holy tea. They then prayed over it, and then their foot was miraculously healed. And because this person's foot healed so well and they were able to get back up and to their work and earn some money, this news then spread like wildfire. Now, if we pause, what happened next may have been accumulation of everything Jack felt and the grief that he felt about his wife's death. I really don't think so. It may have played a part, but I think that there was something evil brewing inside of Jack, and that just happened to come out after his wife had then passed on. So, in 2006, the same year that Jack Mogale's wife passed away, Jack Mogale was arrested for selling fake plots inside a water park. So basically, Jack would approach vendors in his area or wherever he would find them, and he would then say, oh, he owns little plots inside a water park and they must just pay him money, and then he would then help them to get inside the water park so that they could sell whatever they were selling. But of course, this was fake. A water park is generally private property, and he had no access to any plots inside the water park. So he would then go around collecting people's money. The people would then go there with all their stuff and get turned down at the gate, because obviously they couldn't just go into places. So Jack was walking away with their money, but the people were obviously very irritated at this. They then reported Jack to the police. The police then arrested Jack, and Jack was sentenced to 18 months behind bars for fraud. While Jack was in prison, his two daughters then went to stay with Jack's sister, and they stayed in an area called Ennerdale, and this apparently is just south of Joburg. But sadly, Jack's criminal career did not stop there. And I think fair to police in this circumstance, I really don't think that the police had any idea from a man being arrested for, I guess, petty fraud. Jack did a complete 180 and he completely changed his MO. He didn't even commit the same type of crimes. So now let's just get into what Jack Mogale did, and trust me, it gets worse. So it is not really said about what Jack really went through in order to start this type of crime spree. And sometimes I think you don't even have to go through something. If you're a bad seed, you're going to do these things without really having an excuse to do them. But in my humble opinion, I think that Jack started with his crimes because he almost got a god complex for these women coming into his home, drinking his holy tea, feeling that they have been healed and heard by Jack. And because he was having so much success with his herbal tea, I think he got this god complex and thought that he couldn't be touched and that he was better than everyone. In December of 2008, a young lady came into Jack's home and she asked Jack to heal a uterine infection that she had. And the reason that this lady went into Jack's home in the first place is that she had heard through the grapevine that Jack was apparently some preacher from the Zion Christian Church and that he could do miracle healings. So when this lady got inside, she said she had a uterine infection, right? And Jack then said that his way of being able to heal this young lady was that he was going to have sex with her because that's the best way that he could heal her. And the reason that he was going to have sex with her in order to heal was because he would then exorcise the spirits, the bad spirits, out of her. So while Jack is busy telling this young lady what he's going to do, he then hands her this tea, this holy herbal tea. The lady then says a few minutes later that she was completely out of it. She was in and out of consciousness, and when she came to, she was hallucinating. But hours and hours went by, and when this lady finally recovered a little bit, she was able to then see things a bit more clearly. She was then naked from the waist down, and Jack then noticed that she was awake, and he just kind of shooed her away and said, "We're done, you're fine, you can leave now." And some reports did say that she had like herbs inside her, but some other reports didn't mention this. So that is unconfirmed. But I mean, how terrifying to wake up and not really know what happened to you. Now, as a side note, his neighbors did notice that women were coming in and out of his house all the time. but they thought that maybe he was just healing from his wife passing away and these were his girlfriends coming in and out of the house. And yes, they did notice that it was multiple different women, but they just thought that it's Jack, so maybe he's just trying to heal. So after the first woman then entered the house and she then woke up in a completely unknown state and not really knowing what had happened to her, a couple days later, a second lady also entered Jack's house, and there were some prayers that were taking place, and he also handed this young lady herbal holy tea. But something went terribly wrong, and the second woman to enter Jack's house was never seen alive by her family again. 2 days later, after she had entered Jack's house, she was found dead in a veld right next to Jack's shack, and the woman had found to have been and strangled to death. But at this point in time, there was a big distrust with police, so people didn't say anything to the police, but even if they did know anything, they weren't going to say anything. Now, the third lady was actually approached by Jack. Jack was driving in his car when he noticed a young lady walking near his area. He then slowed down and he said that he's a preacher from the Zion Christian Church, and they then started talking. He then offered this young lady a lift into his area because apparently that's where she was going. Instead of taking her home, Jack then dragged her out of the car into a nearby veld, kind of near his shack, and he absolutely attacked her. Jack beat this woman to an inch of her life and left her for dead in this veld. 24 hours after she was dragged out of Jack's car, she then woke up from being completely unconscious. Her jaw had been dislocated, and she had very intense wounds on her body, on her face, and sadly they were completely covered in maggots. She also had a couple of her front teeth missing, and her private area was very, very badly bruised and scratched up. But this woman would be one of 2 surviving victims of Jack Mogale, and she would be very crucial for the trial that would take place later on. Jack Mogale then lured 5 other women into the veld near his home, and these 5 other women would all be hunted by Jack while he was driving in his car. And Jack would disguise himself as a prophet, a priest, or some holy man of authority inside a church. But Jack's reign of terror didn't only stop with these 5 other women that he would drag and then murder inside the veld. He would also prey on victims that he actually knew in the area. And remember the women who would come to his house. So women would not stop coming to his house because they still wanted to be blessed or have some type of advice. So a lot of women in the area would still come into Jack's home, and a lot of them would not make it out again. But with the women who he would lure into his car, he would lure them in, like I said, pretending to be some man of authority with inside the church, and he would either beat the woman as soon as they got into the car, or he would drive just a little bit into a veld. He would take a wrong turn, and then he would drag these women out and then beat them, have his way with them, and then strangle them to death. Or if he didn't strangle them to death with their pantyhose, their panties, or something that he could pull off of them, he would then stab them with a knife if he had that on him. In total, 14 women lost their lives by the hands of Jack Mogale. However, there were 14 women who had lost their lives, but there were so many more women who went into Jack's house, drank this herbal tea, woke up completely dazed, and knew nothing about what had happened to them. But you may also be asking, okay, these women are going into Jack's house. They know that something may have happened to them, and they know who Jack is. Why did they not report Jack to the police? So there may have been a couple reasons for this, and one of them may be that a lot of the women were passed out or unconscious during the time from this holy tea or herbal tea, and it probably was laced with something that would make the woman fall asleep. But when they woke up, they were unsure of what actually happened. They didn't know what happened. They could probably assume and feel, but they believed that Jack was proving his powers all the time. They thought that he was incredibly powerful, and they may have been scared to go to the authorities in case Jack put something on them that could hurt their lives. And maybe because he was so powerful in their eyes, they didn't want to cross someone like this. It was also said that the women were quite young. So when Jack led them into the house and they drank the tea, they were from the age of 19-ish. And older, so they were quite young, inexperienced, and maybe they didn't know really what to do. So Jack's incredibly horrible crime spree went on from 2008 up until late 2009, but police would eventually hit a breakthrough which would break this case wide open, and the breakthrough came in about March of 2009. And this piece of information came from a bystander or a witness who said that they noted Jack Mogale getting into a vehicle with a young teenage girl. And the reason that they're reporting his number plate and who he is, because this teenage girl never came home and she was last seen with Jack Mogale. And sadly, once they reported this issue, a couple of days later, this young girl was sadly found in a veld, dead, and she had also been. So police then headed straight to Jack Mogale's house. They then went into his shack. They had a look around. They couldn't really find anything, but they said, before we go, please may we take a DNA sample. So Jack, thinking he did absolutely nothing wrong, and he was an incredibly spiritual man, and he thought that he could heal anything, he then gave his DNA to the police. And this obviously led to his downfall. So a couple months went by, and police were working around and around the clock to try and find anything to find out who murdered all of these women. Police also worked with Gerard Labuschagne in this case, and he confirmed that because of the MO of this person, that it is most likely a serial killer. And this MO was that he only looked for black young females in his area, and he would pretend to each time be someone as a healer, a church leader, and that is what he would use to lure people in. He would also only attack women within his area. And when he murdered these young women, he would either use their pantyhose, their panties, a scarf, or a knife if he couldn't find anything like that on them. So remember I told you that there was a lady, and she would be very important to the case later on. And she was the woman who survived the horrific beating in the veld with the broken jaw and the maggots inside her wounds. While she came forward to police, obviously she needed help, and the police came. And the police actually took a swab during the examination, and they did find DNA inside her as well as on her body. Then a second lady to survive Jack Mogale within the field also came forward. She also had similar wounds to victim number 1 who survived, except she didn't have a broken jaw, but she did come forward to police. Police also took another DNA swab, and the DNA matched victim number 1 and number 2, so it was the same perpetrator who attacked both victims. And police also then took one body out of the 14 other women who were murdered in a similar fashion. And the reason why they took the one body is because they found a condom right next to her body that was used and quite full. And they then took a DNA swab out of this. And this DNA also matched the 2 other ladies who survived, which means that they then had a serial and murderer on the loose. So while police were looking at this DNA, one of the police officers remembered that they took Jack Mogale's DNA, and they thought, let's just give it a try. There's nothing to lose by testing this DNA. And of course, it was a solid match. The police then got into their vehicles, they got their arrest warrant, and they headed straight out for Jack Mogale's house. They then arrested him, and even though there was so much evidence against Jack, he still denied, and he pleaded complete innocence. He repeatedly said that the DNA was on these women because they were in a consensual relationship, especially a sexual one. And then the cop then turned to Jack Mogale and said, okay, you're in a consensual relationship, but then why are all these women being found dead? Then Jack looked at the police officer who just arrested him, and he said, quote, I want you to help me. When I am with a woman, I lose control and I do not know what to do. I kill them all when they do not give me what I want, end quote. And then he kind of stopped, and he then went on to say, but he didn't do it. There's nothing that he did. He only knew about those 3 women that the police were talking about, and the rest he had no idea who they were. And then, trust me, it doesn't stop. As the police then get to the police station and the holding cells, Jack then steps out of the vehicle, and a woman police officer greets him and kind of grabs his arm to get him out of the vehicle to then put him into the cell. And Jack then turns to this female officer and says, quote, when I come out of here, you will be the first person I rape and kill. And then once Jack was pushed into his cell by this female officer, he then proceeded to pull out his private parts and show it very proudly at this police officer. And then Jack puts everything back in place, and then he goes all the way to the back of the cell and he's like, I didn't do anything. I'm innocent. I have absolutely nothing to do with these murders. I know, right? He then stops saying that he's innocent, and then he says, quote, you know how life is. This is a challenge. I didn't do any of those things. I didn't even know those women, end quote. So life's a challenge, but he didn't do anything. He doesn't know these women. But then he said to the other cop that he does it because they don't give him what he wants. So there's just so much going on in Jack's head, and it still gets worse from there. So the trial then took place over 2 years, and over 40 witnesses came forward in order to say what Jack had done or what they had seen Jack do. But even though there were also so many witnesses, they had this abundance of DNA from Jack because he never cleaned up anything. He just left his DNA everywhere. And DNA doesn't lie. Then, on the 17th of March 2011, the judge presiding over the case called Jack, quote, an evil and perverted murderer and rapist who poses an extreme danger to women in society. The judge then handed over Jack's sentence to him, and Jack Mogale was sentenced to 16 life sentences. All should run concurrently, along with the extra 23 years for the other crimes that he was convicted of. And he would have no access to parole at all, and he would never be granted parole. The judge then turned to Jack again after sentencing him and said, quote, "Sir, there is no way you can be allowed to be out of prison to come into contact with women. I am removing you permanently from society." And then, as Jack was led out of the courtroom, he then shouted and looked at the victims' families and said, quote, "You are also coming, I pray. I will be out soon." And we have spoken about evil on this channel before, but I think Jack really personifies this. But what Jack did was absolutely disgusting, and he still had such audacity to go around saying that he didn't do it. Also then talking to police like that, especially the policewoman. I mean, I'm shocked. But let me know what you think of this case down below. I do think that Jack is suffering from more than just a deep-rooted evil. I think that he may need to go for some psychological evaluation, but also to never ever be released from prison. I think even if they rehabilitate him in prison as far as they can, I still don't think he should ever be released. And thankfully, he's not ever going to be granted parole. So he will definitely be in prison for the rest of his life. We hope. But like I said, let me know what you think down below. I hope you're all having a great day. Please stay safe out there and have a great weekend further. I'll see you again next week. Bye.